The sun rose over Rome like a dull coin. It did not warm everyone. In the narrow streets behind the Forum, smoke from cook fires mixed with the smell of leather, oil, and old fish. A chain rattled somewhere, a cartwheel squeaked. Voices rose and fell like the tide. But inside one large townhouse, a domus of a wealthy senator, everything moved in a tight rhythm of orders and obedience. The house woke before the city. Lamps were snuffed and relit. Coals were stirred and made to glow. Water sloshed inside clay jars that cut into palms. Brooms of stiff straw scratched over stone. Bronze gleamed when rubbed with wool. Bread was set out. Olives, a dish of salted cheese. Fine things, but not for the ones who carried them. They were slaves. Men, women and children owned by the house and counted like spoons. Rome called them speaking tools. They did not vote. They did not own their labor. Many had a small stash of coins, peculium, but even that could be taken back by the owner. Their names were simple and short, easy to call across a hall. One of them was a boy of about 15. His name in the house was Tiro. Tiro had been born far away, near the mountains of Illyria, but he did not remember the road that brought him here. What he remembered was the smell of this place, lamp smoke, vinegar for cleaning, wet wool, and the sharp, sour tang of garum, the fish sauce Rome loved. He remembered the weight of the bronze simpulum ladle he used to pour wine for guests. He remembered the switch the steward kept under his belt. He remembered the iron collar he had once been made to wear, a ring around the neck with a small plate that said in rough letters, "Detain me, if I flee, return me to my master." The collar was not on him today, but he could still feel where it had rubbed the skin raw. This was Rome as it usually looked, not in statues and triumphal arches, but in tasks done at speed and under threat. The senator's house worked like a machine. The main hall, the atrium, had a rectangle of open sky and a shallow pool that caught rain. The light that fell through it was pale and grey. Along the walls hung wax masks of ancestors, the proud faces of men long dead who still watched the living. Their empty eyes looked down on Tiro as he moved, quick and careful, across the floor. The steward was named Felix. He was a slave too, but he had authority. He kept the keys and the ledger. He spoke first to free men who came to the door. He carried a rod and a flagrum, a whip with leather thongs knotted with bone. He said the whip was only a reminder, like a set of scales reminding a merchant to be honest. But everyone understood what it meant. When Felix entered a room, the air got thin. "Faster," he said now, not looking at Tiro, but at all of them. "The master arises with the 7th hour. The bread is late." Tiro did not answer. Slaves were not supposed to answer unless asked. He turned to fetch the bread from the kitchen, peeled his eyes to the floor, and almost ran into a girl with a basket of chopped leeks. She swayed. The leeks slid and scattered like green coins. Their smell filled the hall. Felix saw the mess. His eyes were calm, but his voice was like a cold knife. "Pick it up," he said. "All of it." Tiro and the girl fell to their knees. Their fingers moved like little crabs. The leeks were covered with dust now. They would have to be washed, chopped again and dried. The cook would not be pleased. The day, which had begun early, had already gone wrong. In a rich Roman house, small mistakes were not small. The law of the city had changed over the centuries. Some emperors put limits on what a master could do, but inside many homes, the old belief still ruled. Discipline keeps order. The stick, the chain, the collar, the threat of sale, these were the tools that made the machine run. This is the hidden world we will enter, the narrow space between a breath taken too loud and a blow that follows, the distance between a dropped cup and a mark left by iron. Our path will be simple and painful. We will name 7 punishments a Roman slave could face for small offences, and we will see them not as words on a list, but as real and heavy things that changed bodies and minds. But first we need to stand still and look around the house. The domus spread like a small city within walls. Near the street was the tablinum, where the master sat with his papers. Beyond were dining rooms with couches arranged for 3 guests on each side. There was a small shrine to the household gods. There were storerooms, kitchens, and a tiny space for grinding grain, where the air was powder dry, and the sound was a steady scrape, scrape, scrape. There was a narrow slave quarters with low ceilings and bad air, crowded mats, and the smell of old straw. In the courtyard grew a few plants in pots, a fig, a bay, a twisted olive that never looked happy in its clay prison. Tiro had a job near the front of the house. He ran messages, filled cups, and kept the lamp oil topped up. He liked the routine because it kept him in sight of the door. Whenever a visitor crossed the threshold, the world widened a little. Sometimes a trader came from Syria with bright cloth and glass. Sometimes a soldier came with dust on his boots and scars on his face. Sometimes a poet, hungry-looking and proud, recited lines to the master for a coin. Tiro would watch their sandals and imagine their paths growing long behind them like lines drawn in the dust. He would imagine stepping past the door and not stopping. He did not step past the door. On the wall near the entrance hung the whip. On a peg near the kitchen door hung a set of shackles. Iron rings with a short length of chain and a lock that used a simple key. No one laid a hand on them this morning. They did not have to. To see them was enough to shape the spine, to lower the eyes, to pull a clumsy foot back into line. Punishment lived in the house like a quiet guest who never left. For a small offense, spilling wine on a guest, speaking out of turn, answering too slowly, breaking a cup, there were the common punishments. Tiro had seen them all. He had learned to count them on his fingers the way a cook counts eggs. The first was the lash, a beating, not always with the flagrum with bone knots, that was worse, but with a strap, a stick, a rod of vine. It left welts that faded in a few days, but the memory never faded. The pain taught the body to fear, the fear taught the hands to move with care. This was the simplest tool in the master's chest. The second was chaining. A master might order a slave to be kept in irons for a day, a week, or longer. Sometimes the chain was short to limit steps. Sometimes it joined ankles so the person moved like a bird with bound feet. The chain said, "You do not own your time or your limbs." The third was the mill. Not all houses had a big mill, but many had a hand mill for grinding grain. Turning it all day made the back burn and the arms go dull with ache. It was called the donkey's work because donkeys often pulled larger mills. To be sent to the mill was a punishment, as heavy as the stone and as slow. Hours there felt like being buried in sand that kept pouring. The fourth was marking. Branding or tattooing, stigma. It did not happen every day, and not in every household, but it was known. Some slaves were marked on the forehead or shoulder, especially runaway slaves. Some were made to wear iron collars, light enough to carry, heavy enough to shame. Words on metal or skin said something like, "I am a slave, if you find me, return me." The mark did not come off. It followed a person through rooms and years. The fifth was the yoke, the furka. It looked like a forked stick fitted over the neck and shoulders. A condemned slave might be made to carry it as he walked, a sign to all, "This person has offended." Sometimes the yoke came with beating, sometimes it came with a forced parade through the street. It was painful and humiliating. The wood bit the collarbones. The head could not lower without the stick digging into flesh. The sixth was removal, sale or transfer to harsher work. A bad day in a city house could end with a cart ride to a farm's ergastulum, a private prison for field slaves, or to an owner known for cruelty. For some, it meant the mines, metalla, places of darkness and dust where chains and labor broke bodies. This was often a legal sentence given by authorities, but a master's anger or need for an example could bring the threat near even for lesser faults. Misbehave again, and I will sell you to the mines. The words were enough to freeze the blood. The seventh was the cross, crucifixion. This was not normal for small offences. The law and custom, especially after the early empire, tried to make it a punishment for serious crimes, rebellion, banditry, or a murder in the household. It was public, slow, and meant to warn. But the fear of it hung in the air because slaves knew that their lives rested on the temper of others and the mood of the crowd and the will of magistrates. A master who wanted to make an example might push for it. A city wanting quiet might allow it. The cross stood at the far edge of the field. A black tree no one wanted to see up close, but everyone could picture. These seven, lash, chain, mill, mark, yoke, removal, cross, were not just a list, they were a ladder of fear. A small misstep might start with the first rung, but in the mind of a slave the whole ladder was always there, rising into a sky that grew darker step by step. Tiro knew this ladder. He had felt the lower rungs. He had watched others climb higher. He had seen the yoke cut the skin of a kitchen boy who had stolen a fig. He had seen iron on the ankles of a housemaid who had fallen asleep on her feet and dropped a lamp. He had watched a man he knew only as Daphnis, quick to smile, quick to help, loaded into a cart after gossip said he had spoken ill of the master. The cart had rolled away and no one knew where it went. Felix, the steward, believed in order. He was not savage for pleasure, he stood for the house, he kept it running. In Rome, many believed that a good steward's strictness was a kind of virtue, like a soldier's. But to Tiro, the rod in Felix's hand was not noble, it was the weight that bent his back. On this morning, the house tilted toward trouble. The master had a guest, a man from the provinces who had business before the Senate. He wore a heavy ring with a carved gem. He liked his wine watered to a certain taste. He liked his bread warm. He wanted a small dish of olives with a pinch of ground cumin on top. He wanted all this at the 6th hour, not a breath later. Tiro stood near the doorway with the jug, the cups, the little spoon for the spice. The guest spoke in a slow voice and moved his hands when he talked, as if drawing shapes in the air. The master leaned forward and nodded. The two men were like statues come to life, smooth and polished. Tiro kept his eyes on the lip of the cup so he would not spill. A gnat drifted in the bright square of light above the pool. Someone coughed in a distant room. The world felt made of glass. "Boy," the guest said without turning his head, "more wine." Tiro stepped forward. His hand was steady. He had poured 100 times. He could do it in the dark. He could do it while walking. He tipped the jug. The wine glowed red for a moment in the light. Then, from outside, a sudden shout struck the air. A peddler advertising figs, or a laugh, or the clatter of a cart. Tiro could not tell, because at the same instant his wrist flicked. A slip so slight it would have gone unseen if not for the drop that leaped like a red fly from the jug's mouth and fell, 1, 2, onto the edge of the guest's clean white toga. A small offence, so small, 2 spots. Silence. The guest looked down at the marks, then up at Tiro, not with rage, but with disappointment, which can cut deeper. The master's face did not change. Felix stepped into the atrium without a sound, as if the house itself had pulled him forward. Tiro felt heat climb his neck, his mouth went dry. He could think only of cloth and colour, and the way red soaks into white and refuses to be hidden. He set the jug down. He made the proper apology. He offered a cloth. He did everything he knew to do. He did it fast and well. It did not matter. Felix's hand closed on Tiro's shoulder. It was not hard, it did not need to be. Later, the master said. The word hung in the air like a hook. In Rome, punishment did not always come at once. Sometimes it waited until the meal was over, until the guest was gone, until the day's matters were done. This waiting was a punishment of its own. It turned the stomach. It made each step feel like a step toward a dark door. Tiro went back to his work with a soft buzzing in his ears. He poured carefully. He spoke almost not at all. He did not look at Felix. He did not look at the whip on the wall. But he could feel both of them, like two suns on his skin. What would it be? The lash? The mill? The iron collar again? The yoke in the street, where boys would point and laugh? Or the worst, which, even as a thought, he pushed away with his whole heart? A small offence, 2 drops. Yet Tiro knew what Rome could do with small things. A city that built law from fine points and line after line of writing could also build fear from a spot on cloth. The household gods looked on from the shrine. The ancestors on the wall kept their wax mouths shut. When the meal ended, the guest stood. The master walked him to the door. Soft words, a promise to meet again. The ring flashed once in the sun, then the guest was gone, and the door closed with a sound like a lid. Felix gestured. Tiro followed him past the kitchen and the storerooms, down a narrow passage where the walls grew damp and the air cooler. The floor tilted toward a small chamber with a barred window high up on the wall. Inside was a bench, a bucket, a hook. On the hook hung a yoke of wood. The furca, smooth where hands had touched it, dark where sweat had stained it. On the bench lay a set of light ankle irons. The key waited beside them, heavy and bright. Felix shut the door behind them. The room swallowed the light. "Tiro," he said simply, and the boy could hear in that one word the whole ladder, the 7 steps, the weight of Rome's order bearing down. What will a house choose when it wants to make a lesson out of 2 red drops? Felix did not speak at once. He stood in the doorway of the small chamber and watched Tiro with the still gaze of a statue. Dust moved in the thin light from the high window. Somewhere water dripped. The furca leaned on its hook like a sleeping animal. 2 drops, Felix said at last, his voice even, before a senator, before business. Tiro kept his eyes low. "I am sorry," he said. His mouth felt dry and heavy. "Sorry is a word," Felix replied. "Order is the thing." He set a hand on the bench. The iron links clicked softly against the wood. "The house is a body," he went on. "When a finger shakes, the hand fails. When the hand fails, the mouth goes hungry. When the mouth goes hungry, all die. Do you understand?" Tiro nodded. Slaves learned the house's lessons by heart. Still, the words did not make the air easier to breathe. Felix sighed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but like a miller measuring grain. "Today we will count 3 steps," he said. "The lash to sting the skin, the chain to teach the feet, the furca to warn the eyes of the street. You will return wiser." Tiro's lungs pressed against his ribs. He thought of the whip on the wall beyond this room. He had felt it before. He thought of iron around his ankles, the slow, stiff walk, the shame of a key turning. He thought of the yoke, heavy on the collarbone, the wood biting the flesh where it met the neck. He thought of boys in the street pointing and laughing. He tried to keep his face still. Felix called, and 2 strong housemen, both slaves, stepped inside. They did not look at Tiro. They were men who carried couches and barrels, who lifted amphorae of wine. They knew how to hold a body so it would not flail and bleed worse than needed. "Lean," Felix said. Tiro leaned forward and gripped the edge of the bench. He set his teeth and tried to count his breaths. The lash was a simple strap today, not the knotted scourge. That was mercy of a kind. The first strike licked his back like fire. The second landed in almost the same place, and the pain crossed itself and bloomed. By the third, Tiro's breath had turned to a thin whistle in his throat. By the fourth, he learned again the old lesson. Pain is a road that grows longer as you walk it. You think it must end. It does not end as soon as you think. Felix did not shout. He did not smile. He counted in a quiet voice. The sound of the strap echoed off the stone. When the counted number was done, he said, "Enough," and the strap went still. Tiro's back felt hot and wet under the tunic, where raised lines began to swell. He kept his face to the bench and waited for his breath to join itself again. The chain came next. It was a light set for the ankles, not the heavy farmer's irons that held a person to a wall. The rings were cool and close. A short length of chain between them forced a small step. No running, no quick turn. The clicking sound that followed each movement said, "I am owned." It said it to the body, it said it to the ear, it said it to the floor. Felix knelt to lock the rings. He did not fumble. He had done this before. "You will wear them until night," he said. "You will do your work. You will not stumble." "Yes," Tiro whispered. "And then," Felix added, touching the smooth wood of the yoke, "you will carry the furka in the street. You will walk from our door to the fountain and back. The street will watch. The house will see." Tiro's stomach turned. The fountain was not far. The distance was small, but public shame can feel like a march across a continent. Felix stood and looked at him. "The house lives by law," he said. "The lash, the chain, the yoke. They are not for hate. They are for balance." Balance, that was a word Romans loved. They used it to weigh grain, to count coins, to measure power. But to a back that burned, balance meant the weight of someone else's hand. They led Tiro out. The corridor felt narrower than before. The iron kissed and tapped as he walked. In the kitchen, the air was thick with stew and smoke. A girl at the hearth lifted her eyes and then dropped them again, as if the sight of the chain might jump like a spark and land on her own ankle. An older woman, Marcia, who had raised children in this house, not her own, handed Tiro a cloth and a small jar. "I'll," she whispered, "after, when it is over." Felix heard the whisper and did not object. Oil and wool were part of the same world as rods and straps. Tiro worked through the afternoon with careful steps. He poured wine for men who did not look at his feet. He fetched bread, crisp at the edge and soft at the center. He stood ready as the master spoke with a scribe about rents due from a farm in Campania where vines grew fat and purple. He felt each small turn of his body tug on iron and announce itself to the floor. When the sun in the courtyard square moved toward the far wall, Felix called again. "Now," he said. Tiro followed him to the small chamber. The men took down the yoke. It was a simple piece of wood, forked to fit the shoulders and fixed so that the prongs came up and rubbed against the jaw if the head bowed. A strap tied it in place across the chest. The weight was not great, but it was placed so that the bones of the shoulder sang and the neck stiffened. "Walk," Felix said. They moved to the front door. A porter pushed it wide. Street air came in, thick with dust and the smell of people and donkeys and fish and hot stones. The slaves of the house drifted to the shadows of the hall to see, not with joy, not with hatred, but with the heavy interest of those who live inside the same thin shell and listen for cracks. Tiro stepped out. The street was a ribbon of light between the tall walls of houses. To the left, a mule stood with a cart, flicking its ears. To the right, two boys played at knucklebones. A woman carried a basket of figs. A seller cried out a price for onions. Life moved, and into it walked a boy with a wooden yoke over his shoulders and iron at his ankles. People looked. They always did. Some were curious in a simple way, as if watching a crowd move around a street performer. Some were cold, with the eyes of those who have seen many such walks and learned to make their hearts hard. One man clicked his tongue and shook his head like a teacher. A boy laughed. Another boy did not laugh, but stared with a face that could have been Tiro's face in another house. Tiro kept his eyes level. If he lowered them, the wood would bite. If he raised them, the world would tilt and spin. He walked to the fountain. The water sounded like a whisper. He turned. He walked back. Each step measured the gap between shame and survival. By the door, Felix stood with his arms folded. He did not call names. He did not lift the strap. He watched the way a ploughman watches a furrow to make sure it is straight. He avoided some of the spoils so as not to incur the distraction. Inside again, the strap across Tiro's chest was loosened, the yoke lifted, the iron left for later. Sweat cooled on his back and made the raised lines sting. He held the bench and breathed with care. "This is the lesson," Felix said. "Do you see it?" Tiro nodded. He did see. He saw that in this house, a drop of wine had a price measured in skin and bone and eyes in the street. He saw that the price could have been worse. Felix's face did not soften. "There are higher steps," he said in the same even tone, as if he were naming tools on a shelf. "The mark that never leaves. The sail that takes you from this door and gives you to a darker one, and beyond those, the law's tree." He did not say the word cross. He did not need to. The room felt colder when he said beyond. Tiro thought of a man called Daphnis and a cart and a road going to a farm prison, the Ergastulum, where chains lived like worms in the earth and the sun came in only as a knife of light. He swallowed. "Work," Felix said. "The day is not finished." Tiro went back to the rooms, where lamps needed oil and cups needed washing, and the ash of the brazier needed to be pushed into a neat hill. His steps were a little slower. The chain spoke with a quiet chime. He did not drop anything. The world had a sharp edge now, like a blade that had just met the whetstone. As he worked, the whisper of punishments rolled through the house like a low wind. Slaves talked in kitchens and by doorways when they could, and their talk made a map of fear and hope. "I heard Lucius's owner branded a runaway last week," someone said near the laundry. "Forehead, the mark makes the world look away." "Better than the mines," another answered. "My cousin was sent to the Iron Mountains in Spain. He was 20, he did not see 30. "Have you heard of the law that stops a master from throwing a slave to the beasts?" a third whispered. "They say an emperor made it. You must go to a magistrate now. You cannot do it for sport." "Sport," the first said with a bitter half-laugh, as if the pain cares about the name. These bits were true and not true at once, as such talk often is. Rome had laws that tried to shape cruelty, to make it less wild. There were rules about killing a slave without cause. There were rules about arenas and beasts. There were rules about the sale of slaves who had testified under torture. But in the closed world of a house, law was often a far echo. What mattered was the master's temper, the steward's habits, and the city's need for quiet. Tiro listened without seeming to listen. His mind was busy with simple facts: the weight of a jug, the angle of a lamp, the place where the floor dipped near the doorway, the way his tunic stuck to his back and then cooled in patches as the air moved. He stored away the oil Marcia had given him for later. He kept his hands steady. At dusk, the master walked at last through the tablinum and turned toward the women's quarter. His face was calm, as if nothing had disturbed him all day. The door curtain breathed in and out. The house drew a long breath. Felix came to Tiro in the side hall. He held two things: the small key for the ankle irons and a narrow iron band with a thin plate riveted to it. The collar, Tiro knew too well. "Master wants order seen," Felix said. "You wear the collar for 1 week. Then we will see." Tiro's mouth went dry again. The collar was not heavy, but it made bells ring in his head. It turned his body into an announcement. It told the world to read the plate and judge him without looking into his eyes. Felix raised the band. For a second his gaze paused. "Do not make it worse," he said. "Do not run. The city is bigger than your feet." The collar clicked around Tiro's neck. The ankle irons opened with a bright note and slid away. The absence of their weight did not feel like freedom. It felt like a trap had changed shape. Night in the house came on with soft footfalls and the smell of lamp oil. Slaves rolled out mats. Breath slowed. Somewhere a mouse scratched. Tiro lay on his side and listened to the collar scrape the mat when he moved. He thought of the 7 steps again, like rungs on a ladder buried in the dark. Lash, chain, mill, mark, yoke, removal, cross. Today he had stood on 3 rungs and felt a 4th close around his neck. He did not sleep well. When dreams came, they were of doors that did not open and streets that bent back on themselves. In one, he walked with the yoke and found that the wood did not end, but grew longer with every step, until it bridged the whole city, and his small bones had to carry it. Before dawn, the house rose. Fires were coaxed. Water was hauled. The strap on Tiro's back itched as the swelling grew. He moved with care. He kept the iron off his collarbone by holding his head a little high, which made the world tilt. The day began as days begin, with small sounds and simple tasks. But something had shifted. A rumour ran a quiet circuit. The master had lost face with the guest. The guest had spoken sharply about discipline. The master wanted to be seen as stern. When a master wants to be seen as stern, the air itself grows dangerous. Felix's face did not change. He told the kitchen to save the good bread for visitors and give the ends to the house. He told the porter to bar the door when the sun was high, because a taxman would come by with a notice and it was best to be ready. He told Tiro to fetch the ledger from the storeroom so the rents could be counted again. The ledger was a heavy book of wax tablets bound by cord. Tiro lifted it and felt the tug along his back. He crossed the hall. As he turned, his shoulder brushed a small tray of bronze cups set on a low shelf. One cup tipped, then righted, then tipped again, and then, before his hand could close on it, fell. It struck the floor with a hard, flat sound and rolled in a circle like a coin. It did not bend, it did not break, but the sound was loud. Felix looked over. Tiro froze. The steward's face stayed calm, but his eyes moved like a knife across the scene. The ledger, the cup, the boy with the collar. He stepped forward, lifted the cup, set it back on the shelf so that its edge met the edge of its neighbour in a neat line. Then he turned the iron ring on his finger, a small habit he had when he counted or judged. "Work slower," he said. "Think faster." Tiro nodded. After the 6th hour, Felix added, "You go to the mill." The mill. The small hand mill stood in a room where grain was crushed into meal. It was 2 round stones, one on the other. The top one had a handle. You fed grain into a hole at the top and turned. The work ground the arms and the low back and made the shoulders burn where the collar already rubbed. Donkeys did such work on farms. In town, careless hands did it as a lesson. Tiro's stomach sank. The day would grow long. The night would arrive with a deeper ache. He did not argue. He did not ask for the oil. He did not look to Marcia. He lifted the ledger, walked it with slow care, and set it on the table in the tablinum as if it were a sleeping child. The 6th hour came. The sun dropped its square of light lower on the wall. Felix sent another boy to replace Tiro at the door, and Tiro went to the mill room. The air in there was powder dry. Dust rose with each turn and coated the tongue. The first few cuts of the handle across the palm felt like nothing. Then the skin noticed the grain in the wood. Then the muscles began to speak. After 100 turns, the shoulders complained. After 200, they shouted. After 1,000, they turned to stone and fire together. The girl came and poured more grain. She did not speak. Tiro watched the tiny stream vanish into the hole and thought of time going the same way. He turned. He thought of the 7 steps. He thought of the man called Daphnis. He thought of a door that opened to a cart. He thought of the beyond that Felix had named without saying its name. Across the room, carved on the wall, were scratches from past hands. Some were marks only. One formed a letter, another a little fish, perhaps made by a man who had once seen the sea and wanted to remember water that moved. When Felix came at last and told him to stop, Tiro could barely straighten his back. His hands shook. He swallowed dust and tasted stone. "Go wash," Felix said. "There will be guests again tomorrow." Tiro went to the small basin and splashed water on his face. Mud slid down his neck. He rubbed the collar clean where it had collected dust. He cupped water and drank. Each swallow felt like a tiny gift. At the doorway, the porter whispered as Tiro passed, "Be careful tonight. The master is not pleased. The guest sent word. He said the wine was poorly poured and the bread late." The porter's mouth twisted. "Late," he repeated, as if the word itself were a mockery. In a world of small rulers and tight clocks, late was as dangerous as guilty. Tiro's heart stumbled in his chest. He had paid with skin and iron and wood and stone. Now the word late reached back like a hand from the morning to pull him down again. He went to his mat when night fell. He lay on his side and felt the collar press. He listened to the small sounds of sleep all around him. He measured his breath. He counted not sheep but steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. He told himself the 5th, 6th and 7th were far. Just before he drifted off, footsteps came and stopped. Felix's shadow crossed the doorway. He did not enter. He spoke from the dark, his voice low so that others would not wake. "The master asked about the mark," Felix said. "The mark," Tiro's voice came out as air. "The stigma," Felix said. "He asked if the plate on the collar is enough. He asked if words in iron teach as well as words in skin." Tiro could not speak for a moment. His hand went to his forehead without knowing it, as if to guard it. The skin there felt hot even before any iron touched it. "I told him," Felix went on, "that a mark is forever, that the city forgets most things, that wax masks crumble, but that a cut burned into the head is a thing even death takes a long time to eat." "What did he say?" Tiro asked, his voice thin. "He said," Felix answered, "that he will decide at dawn." The footsteps moved away. The dark grew heavier. Tiro stared into it and did not see sleep. He saw a small iron brand, the quick white light of heat, the smell of cooked skin, and a boy who would never again be only a boy, but always. Everywhere he went. First, a mark. The house was quiet. The city breathed. Somewhere beyond the walls, in a place Tiro could not name, a carpenter made a beam smooth with a plane. The shavings fell like curled leaves. The sound was soft and patient. How many steps down the ladder will one boy be made to go just to pay for 2 red drops? Dawn pressed a pale thumbprint on the sky. The house woke slow, like a beast that knew the day might bite. Coals breathed. Water moved. Voices stayed low. Tiro did not sleep. He watched the grey light climb the wall and felt the iron band around his neck the way you feel a fever, a hot circle that would not cool. Felix came before the others, quiet as always. He carried a small bronze brazier and a pair of tongs. In the tongs was a short iron rod with a flat end shaped like a letter. The letter was not fancy, it was a plain mark any eye could read. Tyro's stomach tightened. He had dreamed of this rod all night, though he had never seen it before. Now it was here, small and simple, like a truth that needs no decoration. Felix set the brazier on a low stone and fed it charcoal. He struck flint, sparks jumped. He did not look at Tyro. "Master?" Tyro whispered, because the question had to find a mouth. "In the tablinum," Felix said. "He will call."
The iron lay across the coals like a sleeping worm. After a moment, it changed color, dark to dull red. The air filled with a sweet, sharp smell that was not yet burned skin, but carried the memory of it. Tyro swallowed and tasted old fear. Felix knelt to check the coals. He had a rag in one hand. He turned the iron with a steady, practiced motion. He did not hurry. He did not delay. This was a ritual, and rituals run on time, the way rivers run on slope. "Felix," Tyro said, his voice thin, "have you done this many times?" Felix kept his eyes on the iron. "Enough." "Does it hurt long?" Tyro asked. "It hurts much," Felix answered, "and then it heals, but the mark remains. It speaks when you do not speak. It enters a room before your face does." Who decides the letter?" Tyro asked, eyes on the red metal. "The master," Felix said. "Sometimes it is a warning to others. Sometimes it is a memory to the branded. Sometimes it is a lie that becomes truth because other eyes believe it." He lifted the iron, looked, and set it back. The color was not ready. He moved one coal with the tongs and blew gently. The bright red grew and steadied. But sounded in the hall a woman's steps, soft over leather soles. The lady of the house, Domina Julia, appeared in the doorway with a small girl at her side. The girl clutched a wooden doll with a string for hair. The lady wore mourning linen and a shawl. Her face was calm and careful, as if every line of it had been written down and approved before use. "Felix," she said, "is this necessary?" Felix stood and bowed his head. "The master asked for order to be seen." Julia's eyes went to the iron. A muscle flickered at her jaw. "He also asked for the accounts to be seen," she said after a breath. "Last week, the steward of our friend Marcellus branded a boy. 3 days later, the boy fell ill and could not work. Emotion makes poor wheat." Felix's face did not move. "This house has taken many kinds of loss," he said. "A mark is cheaper than a rebellion." Julia's gaze slid to Tyro. She knew his face. She knew all their faces. She had given him a crust once when she thought no one saw. "What was the offense?" she asked without softness. "Wine spilled on a guest's toga," Felix said. "Also, lateness." "Lateness," the lady repeated, and the word seemed to float for a moment like dust and then fall. "The guest?" she asked. "A man who wants a vote at the Senate," Felix said. "He sent word. He was displeased." Julia stood still long enough to make silence. The little girl looked at Tyro with the clear, unguarded eyes of a child, and then looked at the iron and then at the doll in her fist. She pulled the doll against her stomach as if the house had grown cold. "Do not heat it further," Julia said. "Not yet." She turned. "I will speak to my husband." She left, the child followed, the air moved with their going. Felix did not touch the brazier. The iron hummed in its color. A few breaths later, a guard from the street came to the door with a wax tablet on a cord. The porter brought it to Felix. "From the guest," the porter murmured. Felix read the lines pressed into wax. His mouth became a thinner line. He held the tablet out for Tyro to see, though he knew the boy could not read well. "He writes that he had stains on his toga," Felix said. "He writes that our household is loose. He writes that a mark would show Rome that we are not loose." The words hung in the air like hooks. A man outside the house wanted iron to cut a boy inside it. Rome, like a giant, had many hands. Felix took a breath, then another. He set the tablet down. He watched the iron. Its dull red began to fade toward black. Footsteps, heavier this time. The master entered. He wore a simple tunic and a look like a closed gate. Julia stood behind him with a hand at her throat. He did not look at her. Felix bowed, Tiro kept his body still, though his heart pulled like a tied animal. 2 drops, the master said, more to the ceiling than to anyone in the room. A guest displeased, a word sent. He looked at the iron. He looked at Tiro's forehead as if there were already a letter on it. His gaze slid to the collar with its plates and then to Julia's face. They did not speak, but their eyes met and crossed like 2 thin blades. The house must be seen, the master went on, but a ruined tool is no use. He lifted a hand. Felix's shoulders loosened by 1 grain. The brand can wait, the master said at last. We double the days for the collar. We send the boy to the mill this week and next in the afternoons. And he paused and everything leaned forward. On the market day, the boy carries the yoke to the Forum fountain, not just our street. People must see we tend our own discipline. Julia let out a breath she had kept too long. It made no sound. Felix nodded once. As you wish. The master turned to go. At the curtain, he hesitated, looked back at Tiro, and added, if there is one more fault we mark, I will not speak again. He left, Julia left. Their absence made the room feel bigger. Felix bent and, with tongs, lifted the iron aside from the coals. He set it on a tile to cool. The hiss was small and sharp. He did not add new fuel. You heard, he said. Yes, Tiro managed. The yoke to the Forum, Felix repeated. That is not a small walk. Keep your steps true. Do not stumble. Do not look at the boys. Do not answer if someone mocks you. Do not give them a story to carry. Tiro nodded. His knees loosened from the tight hold he had not named. He felt dizzy in the way a person feels dizzy when a cut that was coming does not come today. Felix wrapped the little brazier with a cloth and carried it away. Tiro stood alone by the bench where the iron had glowed. He did not thank the gods. The household gods had watched all morning and had not moved. He rubbed the collar where it rubbed him. He felt its plate. The letters there were rough and ugly. They said, hold me, return me, I belong. He could not see them, but he knew their shape as well as he knew the shape of his hand. The day unfolded like a careful rug. Tiro poured wine, counted cups, fetched oil. At the 6th hour, he went to the mill. He turned the stone. The collar bit his neck. The strap marks on his back itched under sweat. Dust rose and stuck to his lips so that he did not know if he drank stone or water when he finally reached the basin. In the evening, Marcia found him and held out the small jar she had given. Now, she said, rub it in. He did, slow. The oil was like a thin hand smoothing a wrinkled cloth. It did not remove pain. It taught it to sit in a different chair. At night, he slept in pieces. When he woke, the iron circle around his neck had a heat of its own. He found he held the edge of the collar when he dreamed, as if he could lift it off by will. He could not. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th, the city's market day came, and with it, the order, the yoke to the Forum. Felix fixed the furka on Tiro's shoulders in the doorway where all could see it done. He checked the strap across the chest. He pulled it until Tiro's breath thinned, then loosened a finger's width. You will go with 2 housemen, he said. They will keep boys off your back. They will not shield you from eyes. Remember, you walk for the house. For the house, Tiro repeated, though the words were ash on his tongue. They stepped into the sun. The walk to the Forum was not far in miles, but it passed through the tight throat of the city, where narrow streets emptied into squares, and squares poured their people back into narrow streets again. The yoke did what it was made to do. It lifted Tiro's chin and held it there, so the world could see his face. If he tried to lower his head, the wood bit. If he tried to turn, the prongs nudged and scraped. The iron collar touched the wood and made a small, steady tap-tap with each step. Eyes found him. Men in togas, women with baskets, children in tunics, a man with a soldier's haircut, a vendor with dyed hands from figs, a beggar by a post. Some eyes slid away quick, as if looking might pull shame onto themselves. Some eyes held, cold and flat. A few eyes warmed, not approval, not pity, but the old human warmth that says, I see you. Those were the worst because they made pain feel like a thing with a name. Near the Forum, a boy picked up a pebble and tossed it. It struck the wood and made a hollow thuck. One of Tiro's escorts raised a hand. The boy ran. Another boy stuck out his tongue. An older youth, cocky with friends, walked close and whispered a joke, and the circle of youths laughed, the small, high laugh of those who have never carried a beam. Tiro's steps were short and exact. He placed each foot as if writing a careful letter. He told his breath to stay in his chest and not leak out through his teeth where others could hear it. He told his eyes to look past faces to the line of the street ahead. He told the skin along his collarbones that there would be evening again and a mat and oil. They reached the fountain, a senator's statue, through a thin band of shade. The water fell in a steady silver stream that did not care about men. Tiro paused, turned, and began the walk back. That was when he saw her. A woman in a plain cloak, not rich, not poor. She stood with a basket of olives on one hip and a baby asleep on the other. As Tiro passed, she made the smallest movement with her chin, down, as if to say, "I lower my head for you since you cannot lower yours for yourself." No word, no tear, only that small bow. It struck Tiro harder than the boy's pebble. It told him he was not a thing, even when the wood said he was. It told him someone had seen a person under the yoke. He did not cry. He could not. The wood would bite, but something in his chest softened and then set, like wet clay that a hand has pressed and left to dry. They returned. Felix met them in the hall and nodded once, satisfied. Like a builder who finds a wall plumb. He undid the strap. The wood rose from Tiro's shoulders. For a moment, the body could not believe the weight was gone and still leaned against a pressure that was no longer there. Then the absence became real. Tiro's knees trembled. "You will go to the mill," Felix said, "the way a man says, the sun will set." The mill was now part of the afternoon, like the taste of dust. Days became a rope. Tiro walked along it, hand over hand. The collar chafed. The lash marks faded from red to brown to lines like old river seen from a hillside. His arms grew hard from the mill. He learned to move under the yoke without letting it cut deeper. He learned the faces that watched and the ones that did not. He learned hunger's schedule. Then the rope jerked.
It was small at first. A cup went missing, a silver cup with a dolphin on the handle. The kind guests notice because it catches light. The kitchen swore it had seen it after the morning wash. The dining room swore it had not seen it since the last guest drank. The porter swore no stranger had passed the door. Felix did not swear. He listened. He watched. He turned the iron ring on his finger. The cup was not found that day. The next day, a rumor arrived at the door, like a dog that knows the way home. A slave in the next street had been caught with a ring he should not have had. The ring had a carved gem. The man said he had found it in the gutter. The owner said he had not. The magistrate said the truth would be brought up under a rope and a stick, since the man was a slave, and the law allowed truth to be pulled by pain. Felix's face did not change when the porter told him. He sent a boy to stand near the magistrate's house and listen. He told the kitchen to count the cups again. He told the laundry to check all cloth and shake it hard over a basin. He told the house to keep its breath quiet. At dusk, the boy returned from the magistrate's with a scrap of talk. The ring was the very shape of our guest's ring. The guest had complained loudly in the forum. He had spoken not only of his ring, but of our house. He had said, discipline here was soft, and that our lash was made of wool. The words travelled through the house like sparks on dry grass. Discipline, soft, wool, guest, ring, cup. The sparks found dry places and glowed. That night the master did not eat with his family. He ate alone in the tablinum. When he finished, he called Felix. They stood by the ancestor masks. The eyes of the dead looked on, blind and heavy. The city gossips, the master said. Yes, Felix said. The guest speaks, the master said. Yes, Felix said. The cup is missing, the master said. Yes, Felix said. The boy with the collar, the master said. And he did not need to say Tiro's name. The house knew which boy wore iron at the neck. Felix's hand moved to his ring. He spilled he said. He wore the yoke. He turned the mill. He did not run. He has not lied to me. He is clumsy when fear eats his breath, but he is steady when fear is a little less. The master looked at Felix a long time. Our friend Marcellus sold 3 house slaves to the Ergastulum last month, he said softly. He says, the rest now listen better, the farms always need hands. He did not say, I could sell 1 boy for a story to tell the city. He did not need to. Felix's jaw worked once. He did not plead. He did something harder. He told the truth that helps a house, not the truth that helps a heart. If you mean to sell, he said, do it quick. Delay rots the barrel. The master nodded as if he had expected nothing else. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow? The word dropped into the night like a stone into a deep well. Felix left the tablinum. He did not go to Tiro at once. He went to the small room where the furca was kept and laid his hand on the wood. He went to the place where the chain hung and touched the iron. He went to the mill room and looked at the stone as if it might speak for the boy. Stones do not speak. He went last to the slave quarters and stood in the door until Tiro felt him there and sat up. The master will sell you in the morning, Felix said, plain as bread. Tiro did not understand the sound at first. The words were simple. The meaning was a door falling shut. He felt the collar as if it had grown heavier in a breath. For the cup? He asked. For the guest's words? For order, Felix said. He did not say more. He did not say, for fear. He did not say, for the story the city tells about us. He did not say, for the ladder others will see and choose not to climb. Where? Tiro asked, because even a man in a flood asks where the shore might be. The farm, Felix said. The Ergastulum there is tight. The vines are heavy this year. They will buy. The farm. The private prison. The narrow rooms. The ankle irons that never open. The sun that burns and the whips that whistle, not as a lesson, but as a clock. Tiro's chest did not move for a count of 3 heartbeats. Then breath came back in a jagged piece. Felix, he said, the name a rope his mouth could still hold, I did not take the cup. Felix's face did not move, but something in his eyes did. I know, he said. Tiro waited, but no other word came. Knowing was not saving. Sleep, Felix said, because the body must do what the body must do even when the sky presses low. You need your legs in the morning. He left. Tiro lay back. The collar touched the mat. His eyes were open to the dark. The 7 steps rose in his mind like a hill. The 5th step had been the yoke. The 6th was sail and removal. The 7th, he pushed the thought away with both hands from the inside of his skull. The 7th was the tree, with the arms that held men until they became birds that could not fly. Somewhere in the city a hammer rang, slow and steady, on an anvil. Someone shaped iron for a farmer's tool, or a jailer's chain, or a soldier's buckle. The sound came like a heart in the night. If the farm took him, what parts of Tiro would remain his? What part can a person keep when the sun is a fist and the earth is a lock? Morning would answer. Morning came like a judgment. The sky was clear and cold. The house breathed in and out, steady as always. Tiro felt none of that steadiness in his chest. He rose when told. He washed his face. He did not touch the oil jar. Oil is for wounds that will be seen again by the same eyes. He tied his belt and stood where Felix had told him to stand. By the door, under the wax masks that looked down with their blank stares. The master did not come. He sent a freedman instead, a man with a seal ring and a quick, sharp way of speaking. 2 housemen took up positions behind Tiro. Felix stood before him with a cord and a short chain. The farm's agent waits at the cattle market, the freedman said. No delay. Felix nodded. He did not look at Tiro for a long breath. Then he lifted the iron from a peg and fastened the ankles again, light but close. He tied a cord between Tiro's wrists, not a hard knot, only enough to say, "You do not choose." He adjusted the collar with quick, neat hands. His mouth held whatever words it had wanted to say. They went out. The street had that morning's smell of wet dust and cold stone. Bread ovens breathed hot air into doorways. A cellar called out hot chickpeas from a brazier. The city was itself. It did not care who walked chained through its throat. It had carried many such feet before, and it would carry many more. The cattle market was a wide, noisy world of its own, bleating animals, lowing oxen, men with staffs, boys with lines of rope, drovers with leather caps, and smell upon smell, dung, sweat, trampled hay, hot metal, sour wine. At the edge, under a strip of shade, a small knot of men stood with tablets and cords. They were the farm's men, the villicus, overseer, with square shoulders, a clerk with a stylus, and a buyer with eyes that moved as if weighing meat. The freedman spoke first. Formal words, numbers in wax. The villicus looked Tiro up and down, the way a mason looks at a stone to see where it will fit in a wall. He pressed a thumb to the muscle of Tiro's arm, not cruelly, but like a man checking a fruit for ripeness. He lifted the edge of the tunic and glanced at the lash marks, the way a farrier checks a horse's legs. He tapped the collar plate and read its ugly letter. He nodded once. "Illyrian?" he asked aloud, without asking Tiro. "Read in house since 7, the freedman said. Quick with cups, strong enough for vines. Needed a lesson, now the house needs quiet." The villicus grunted. "We need hands. The vines are heavy. The press must run. He will learn a different lesson there." He named a price. The freedman named a higher one. They shaved numbers like men shaving wood curls from a stick. The clerk scratched lines. The buyer watched the mouths, not the numbers, because mouths tell the truth even when wax tries to hide it. Tiro stood still. He watched a fly walk across the villicus's cheek. He did not feel part of the talk. He felt like the jug set on a table while men discussed whether its lip was chipped. At last, the stylus stopped its clicking. The cords were tied, one cord on a tablet to show the bargain, another cord to Tiro's wrists to show the change of hands. The freedman passed the chain's key to the villicus. It was a small, bright thing. It shone once in the sun, then vanished into a new hand. Felix had not come to the market. He had sent Tiro off from the door and turned back to his ledgers and his keys. A steward's love, if it lives, lives deep and quiet. It cannot speak when coins speak. The farm men took Tiro to the cart. It was a low thing with high wheels and a plank bench. Other people were there already. 2 men with shaved heads and a woman with strong hands. They wore simple tunics. Their ankles held iron twins to Tiro's. Their faces held that look of men and women who have learned not to ask what cannot be given. The cart rolled. Rome slid past. The tall blocks of tenements. The temples with clean lines and steps worn by knees. The sellers with their cries. The dogs with their ribs. Then the gates, and the road that ran like a scar through the land. The city's noise fell away and left the clop of hooves, the squeak of a wheel, the jingle of a chain when someone shifted, and the thick, living sound of the countryside. Insects, birds, men in fields calling to each other and to their beasts. The farm sat on a low slope above rows of vines that drew green lines across the earth. From a distance it looked peaceful. Up close, it showed its teeth. You could see the ergastulum at once, if you knew what to look for. A long, low building, half sunk into the ground, its windows slit thin and high, its door heavy with crossbars, the smell at its edge not of a home, but of a stable where the animals are men. The sun touched its roof. The light did not easily enter its rooms. The Vilica stepped down from the cart and gave orders with the nods and short words of a man whose voice does not need height to be heard. The clerk went to a small office and hung the tablet on a peg. The buyer went off to count sacks. A broad-shouldered man with a face like carved oak took Tiro's chain. The oak-faced man was the custos, the keeper. He waited by the ergastulum door, with a key big as a child's hand. Behind him, in the dim, men moved like slow fish in a pond, shapes more than bodies. Iron clicked. Breath made a rich, wet sound. The door opened. The smell reached out and took Tiro by the back of the neck. Old sweat, damp stone, straw gone sour, iron, and the sharpness of vinegar where sores had been washed. He stepped inside. The room was long and low. Along its sides were wooden frames like ladders set upright. The stocks, an ankle, could be placed between two beams and pinned there by a peg. At night, whole rows of ankles slept that way, neat as jars on a shelf. Above, from the beams, hung chains with cuffs for wrists when work demanded stillness or the steward demanded a lesson. The floor was tamped earth. In one corner was a hole with a bucket over it. In another, a ledger hung on a nail, because even in darkness, someone always counts. New one, the keeper said. Illyrian blood, housebred. He looked Tiro straight in the face. Not unkind, not kind. You will work. If you work, you will eat. If you do not, you will taste wood and leather. If you run, you will not run far. If you fight, you will fight alone. He lifted Tiro's ankle chain. He fitted the rings to a staple near the wall that allowed a small circle of movement. Enough to lie down, enough to stand, not enough to reach the door. He put a mark by a name in the hanging ledger. Another line, another life, entered the count. That first afternoon the farm made itself known in Tiro's bones. They took him out to the vines. They put a sarculum, a short hoe, in his hands. Clear the weeds, the overseer said. Keep the roots clean. You see a shoot that steals the vine's strength, pinch it off. He demonstrated with thick fingers that could break a man's nose or a branch with the same pressure. Tiro bent, he scraped, he pinched. The sun made a white square in his eyes until everything else was a double. His back hurt first, high where the yoke had bitten, low where the mill had taught him a new kind of fire. His hands blistered because housework grows pads in different places than fieldwork does. When he straightened, the iron at his ankle tugged him down again with a quiet, patient voice. No, lower. Around him, men moved like parts of a machine. They did not talk much. When they did, the words were short and practical. Hold the hoe like this. The edge pulls straighter that way. Drink now, not too much, else your stomach will turn and the overseer will say you are soft. Put straw under your side at night. The ground steals heat you will need tomorrow. At midday, a bucket passed. Barley mash, garlic, a sprinkle of salt, if luck was kind. It was heavy food for heavy work. Tiro ate without taste. The mash went down like stones to a well. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and went back to the vine. In the late afternoon, the overseer's shadow fell long. Enough, he said. Enough did not mean finished. It meant the sun had won again, and men had not. They went back to the ergastulum in a line, iron marking the dirt with a thin, regular score. Inside, the stocks waited. Some men's ankles were pegged at once. They were known to talk back or to dream of running. Others sat and rubbed their feet and told their muscles to remember they were not wood. The keeper made his walk, checking, listening, poking a shoulder here, lifting a mat there to be sure no tool or shard of metal hid like a small, dangerous hope. Tiro found a space on the floor. Straw, thin as a joke, lay there. He lay on his side and felt the collar's plate press the skin. He listened to the building sounds. He thought of Rome. its voices, its square of sky in the atrium, the face of the woman at the forum with her small bow. He thought of Felix, he thought of the master, he thought of the cup that had rolled in a ring and not broken. He felt a kind of anger that was not hot but cold, like metal left in winter. That night, a sound came through the door before sleep. Hoofbeats, fast, voices. The keeper set the bar aside and opened. The Vilicus came down the steps, bringing with him air that smelled of dry grass and horse. "News from the city," he said. He held up a small wax tablet with a cord. "From the steward of the house that sold the Illyrian." The keeper looked toward Tiro, only a flick of his eyes. He did not speak Tiro's name. He took the tablet, held it under a lamp, and read with slow care. He was not quick with letters. Farm work uses numbers more than words. When he finished, the keeper's mouth moved once, as if he had tasted something that might be sweet and might be bitter. He handed the tablet back. "Well?" the overseer asked, coming close because he liked to stand in the heat of news the way some men like to stand in the heat of a fire. "The silver cup was found," the keeper said, "in a folded cloth in the laundry, caught at the corner like a fish in a net. A girl must have hidden it to polish later or to steal later, no one knows which. The guest's ring, the one that started the talk in the forum, belonged to the guest's own slave after all. The magistrate sent the man back with a warning. The city talked. The talk turned. The steward writes, 'If it is possible, return the boy. If not, count his price against the olives due next month.' The ergastulum did not have many laughs. A small one came then from the dark, quick and then gone like a spark. Men are men. Even when iron sits on their ankles, a twist of fortune can bury its fingers in the ribs and pinch out a thin sound." The Vilicus grunted. "The vines do not return their shoots to the root once you cut them," he said. "The boy is ours now. He is paid for. Paper is paper. A back is a thing." The keeper's face, hard and old as it was, shifted again by a hair. "The steward asks," he said softly, a little stubbornness under the softness, "and we have done favours for him before. He was the one who sent rope when our press broke last year." "Rope is not a man," the Vilicus replied. "The press runs now." The two men looked at each other across a small, careful space. One counted in bushels and skins of oil, the other counted in heads and backs. They both counted, because that is how a Roman farm breathes. "Let the night pass," the Vilicus said at last. "I will send to the master. If he tells me to return the price, we return. If he tells me to keep, we keep. Until then, the boy sleeps where he lies." He nodded toward Tiro, as if pointing at a sack of barley. He left. The door bar slid into its sockets with its usual heavy sound. Sleep did not come quick to Tiro, but when it came it fell like a stone down a well and sat there. The body had worked all day. Even fear must bow to that. At grey light the overseer came with his stick. "Up," he said. "The vines wait." They went out again. Tiro's hands burned. His back spoke in two voices, one new from the field, one old from the yoke. He bent and scraped. He pinched shoots. He learned to see the difference between a greedy stem and a good one. He learned to feel when the hoe bit too deep and cut a root the vine needed. He learned that his breath could be measured like olives, no waste. Mid-morning, a rider came from the house. Dust ran before his horse like a small flood. He slid down, tossed his reins to a boy, and strode to the Vilicus. "The master says keep the boy and send word," he called, not caring who heard. "The steward begs, but the master says the house must be seen. If we look soft after selling, the city will say we did not mean it. He says he cannot buy back faces." The Vilicus nodded, as if this matched the words that had already formed in his own head. He lifted a hand toward the vines, as if to say, "You see? Work." The rider leaned closer and lowered his voice only a little. "One more thing," he said. The guest, our great man, has made a show. He has had his slave beaten in the forum for the lie with the ring. He has spoken high words about order, duty, and the old ways. The crowd liked it. They cheered when the rod fell. They always cheer when someone else's back is the drum. The overseer smiled without teeth. The keeper grunted in that way that is neither yes nor no. News travels like wind. It reached even Tiro's row. The men near him heard. One spat dust, one whispered old ways. One said nothing, but cut the weed at his foot with such care that a gardener would have been proud. For Tiro, the words fell like stones in a jar that was already full. The jar held lash, chain, yoke, mill, the near mark, the sail, 6 steps. The 7th stood where it had always stood, out past the vines on the road's far edge, the tree with arms. He worked and told his breath to be a rope he could hold. At noon, a new shadow fell, not the overseer's, not the Villicus's. A magistrate's clerk came from the road with 2 men in white for show and 2 soldiers for weight. The clerk had the look of a man who lives by spoke, words and written ones, and respects both. He read from a tablet. By order of the magistrate in the 5th ward, he said, a slave named Onesimus, property of the visiting senator, was punished for false speech that troubled the market. The senator's honor is mended by the rod. The city's ears are corrected by hearing it. The matter of the missing silver cup has been settled within the house that reported it. No further inquiry. Let work continue. He wrapped the cord around the tablet and tucked it away. He turned to go, then paused and looked over the line of men and boys under the sun. His eyes slid past Tiro, then slipped back and held a moment longer than they needed to. Perhaps he had seen the collar's plate. Perhaps he had seen many such plates, and they had become to him their own language. He lifted his hand in a small, helpless gesture, almost a shrug, almost a blessing, and rode away. The men went back to their rows. The sun burned, the dust rose, the day did what days do. That evening the Villicus came into the ergastulum. He stood by Tiro's place. He did not sit, because men like him do not sit where fetters sleep. The house will count your price against olives, he said. You will stay, you will work. If you work, you will eat. If you run, the road will not end well for you. Tiro looked up at him. His mouth made no words. His eyes made many. Save your breath for the vines, the Villicus said, not unkindly. He turned away. The keeper, after the door was barred, came back with something in his hand. It was small, a rag with a dab of goose fat in it. He put it down without a word. Tiro rubbed it under the collar where the skin had cracked. The fat sat like a little mercy on a big hurt. Night laid its weight on the farm. The stars came like cold nails hammered into a black plank. Men turned and did not sleep. Some prayed. Some cursed in whispers. Some planned and unplanned 100 times a run that would never cross the first field. Tiro lay on his side. He thought of the woman at the forum who had lowered her chin. He thought of Felix' steady eyes and the way his voice had held when he said, I know. He thought of a law that lives in men's mouths and of another law, the one Rome writes with leather and iron and crowds. He thought, as he had thought every night since the day of the 2 red drops, of the ladder. He had climbed to the 6th rung, removal. The 7th waited, not because he had stolen or killed, but because the world he lived in kept the tree standing for slaves as a sign to others. In that world a rumour, a moment of order-making, a master hungry to look strong, a magistrate eager to please a crowd, these could lift a man from ground to wood. If a small offence could push a boy to the edge of a farm prison, what would a small defiance cost him now? The answer would rise with the sun. Harvest came hot and fast. The grapes swelled and darkened. and the whole farm smelt sweet and sour at once. Sun-warmed skins crushed fruit, wet wood and sweat. Men moved like parts of a great clock, cut, carry, dump, press. The press itself stood under a roof of rough beams, a deep trough, a long screw, heavy crossbars, and a thick lever that many hands pushed in a circle to squeeze the juice. Tyro learned this work quickly because he had to. He learned where the boards were splintered, where the press creaked, where the floor dipped and pooled purple with runoff. He learned that you never put your sleeve near the turning bar, that you call hands before the screw comes down, and that the lowest worker, always the newest, shovels the crushed skins back under the screw when the cake splits. Faster, the overseer kept saying, not cruel, but clipped. The heat will turn it if we don't. Faster. Faster is a word that sharpens every edge. On the third day of pressing, the sun was straight overhead and mean. Juice ran in a steady ribbon. Men's feet were purple halfway to the ankle where puddles spread. Flies came in a black cloud and were waved away with sticky hands. The screw creaked. The bar went round. A new boy, a reed-thin Gaul with hair like dry grass, shoveled skins at the edge of the trough. He tried to watch everything at once, which meant he watched nothing. His sleeve was loose. It trailed when he bent. Tyro saw it before it happened. He saw the fabric near the bar, the way a fox sees the snare just before the rabbit steps. He opened his mouth, but the clock of the press kept turning, and the boy's sleeve brushed the bar and caught. The world snapped small. "Stop!" Tyro shouted, the word ripping out of him before rank or fear could hold it down. He leapt, slammed his shoulder into the lever and threw his weight backward. For an instant, the men around him kept pushing. Then, the force of one man against many made the bar buck. Confusion broke the rhythm. Hands slipped. Tyro got both arms around the lever, dug his heels and shouted again, louder, "Stop! Hands!" The circle stuttered and stopped. The screw groaned and held. The bar hung there, heavy as a god's arm. The new boy froze. His sleeve tore with a sound like paper. Tyro pulled him back by the belt so fast the boy fell. Purple juice splashed and ran. The overseer's stick was in the air before the boy hit the floor. He spun on Tyro because Tyro had broken the holy rhythm, because stop had not come from the man who gives orders, because farm order is a tight string and tight strings snap if pulled wrong. "What do you think?" he began, coming hard. Tyro did not drop his eyes. "His sleeve," he said, breath high and thin. The bar would have taken his arm. The overseer's mouth stayed open for one more heartbeat. He looked at the boy on the floor, at the torn cloth, at the place where skin had been a finger's width from wood and iron. He closed his mouth. Then he did a thing all good overseers do when they want a machine to run tomorrow as well as today. He swallowed the shout that would make him feel strong and chose the order that would keep men whole. "Cut the sleeves," he snapped, not at Tyro now, but at everyone, all of them. "High, today." He snapped his fingers at the keeper. "Bring the knife." He turned back to Tyro and let one hard word out so no one would think the world had turned upside down. "Do not break my circle again without shouting sooner," he said. "You shout sooner, I stop sooner. We don't waste strength." Then lower, almost private, "Good eye." The knife came. Sleeves went. The bar turned again. The juice ran. The flies returned to their feast. The new boy sat for a moment with his hands on his knees, pale under the grape stains. He looked at Tyro as if to say 50 words he did not have. Then he stood and took the shovel. That night the ergastulum was a little warmer than usual. The keeper walked down the line, looked at ankles, peered at wrists, and then stopped by Tyro with something under his arm. A strip of wool. "For the collar," he said, not looking at Tyro's eyes. "Tie it under the band. It will steal a little rub." Tyro slid the wool between iron and skin. The relief was small and huge at the same time, like a drink taken after a long climb. He said nothing. The keeper would not have wanted thanks. Men like him do not want their small mercies named. 2 days later, Rome's voice came to the farm by way of the road. "Out," the Villic was ordered at dawn. "All hands to the boundary, now." They went in a line, iron ringing, dust rising around their ankles. The road beyond the vines ran straight, a Roman's proud line drawn across hills and time. Where it met the boundary marker, a crowd gathered. Farm men, field women, shepherd boys, a peddler with a tray, a city visitor on a mule who liked to see such things because city men like to think country pains are old and noble. At the roadside stood a rough beam and a shorter post. Wood, rope, 2 soldiers with faces like doors shut against rain, a magistrate's clerk with a tablet, a small knot of local men who had put on white to look like goodness. The air smelled of dust and sweat and fig leaves. The sun got higher. They brought a man. He was a slave from another farm, caught after running with a knife to the road and taking bread from a cart with fear in his eyes. There had been a struggle. Someone had fallen. No one was dead, the clerk said, but a free man's blood had touched the ground. The law had been asked to speak. It had chosen the oldest public word it had for slaves. Crucifixion was not for small slips, it was for meanings. It hung a body up where eyes could not avoid it, so that fear would do the work leather could not finish. In the early empire, magistrates had tried to keep it for great crimes, for rebels and bandits and those who spilled master's blood, but the shape of it, wood and rope and a man lifted, still lived along roads where slaves walked, because Rome liked its warnings big. The soldiers worked as if building a fence. The ropes went around wrist and wrist. The beam slid into the post. A body rose. The breath went out of the crowd in a soft, surprised animal sound, the way breath goes out when a hawk drops on a rabbit. Everyone had been watching without knowing it. They did not use nails. Rope bit just as well and cost less. The man made a sound that was not a word. The clerk read a few lines off the tablet about order and property and the peace of the road. People nodded, because nodding makes fear feel like agreement. The man on the wood turned his face toward the vines. His eyes were open and full and empty all at once. He did not cry for mother or God. He said one word in a small voice that only those close could hear, a name perhaps of a friend, or the name of a river from his first home. Then the sun did what the sun does, and the wood did what the wood does, and the body did what the body does when it is made into an example. The Villicers did not let them stand long. "Back," he said, voice flat. "Keep the rows clean. If men stare too long, their thoughts grow teeth." They filed past the beam. A boy crossed himself in a pagan way he had learned in his village, not a Christian sign, just a small guard against evil. A woman looked straight ahead, the way a mother looks when she knows her child will watch her face and learn from it whether to weep or walk. The new Gaul boy stared at the ground and stepped in a hole and stumbled, then righted himself fast, looking around like a rabbit. Tyro walked by and did what he had learned to do in the city with the yoke. He kept his head level, his eyes where they needed to be to make his feet precise, his breath locked in his chest so his ribs would not show others his heart. But inside, the ladder he had carried in his mind for days, the 7 steps, stood in front of him like a real thing he could touch. Lash, chain, mill, mark, yoke, sail, and there, wood. Now he had seen the 7th with his own eyes. It was not a story, it was a fact made of wood, rope, sun, and a man's weight. It was older than his fear, and bigger than it too. Back at the press, the work went on. Work always goes on, which is one way strong worlds stay strong. The screw turned. The juice ran. The overseer's voice kept the beats in time. The boy with the torn sleeve now had no sleeves at all. He worked close to Tiro, watching him without staring, copying the angle of his hands on the shovel, learning small safety by sight. That night, Tiro could not sleep. He lay on his side with the strip of wool warm under the collar and the goose fat soaked deep where the iron used to bite. Men groaned in their dreams. One man whispered a prayer to a local god of the boundary stone. Another cursed a river far away in his own language. The keeper snored once and stopped, and then breathed again. In the dark, Tiro's hand found the wall where old marks had been scratched. A letter, a fish, a line. He ran his nail along the clay like a blind man reading a story someone left. He found a smooth patch and scratched 7 short lines, one under the other. He stopped before the last. For a long time he held still, nail hovering, and then he dragged the line only halfway and left it open. Morning brought news again, because Rome is a city of words and the countryside lives under their shadow. A messenger from Felix stood at the farm gate with dust on his feet and a cord at his neck with a tiny wax tag. For the Vilicus, he said, but the Vilicus waved him to the keeper, and the keeper waved him to Tiro because the tag was small and had a notch that meant, for this one's eye. The messenger waited while Tiro looked. The wax had been pressed with a little seal that was not the master's, it was the steward's. Felix's. Inside, on the soft tablet, the lines were few and careful. Learn the press, keep your body whole, share water, speak low, watch for small doors where large doors shut. Do not give them the story they want. I remember. No promise, no plan, just a handful of words that laid a thin plank across a deep place. The messenger did not wait for an answer. He had none to take. He returned to the road, a thin man in a big land. From that day, Tiro did 3 things that seemed small when told, but were large when lived. First, he made himself into a pair of eyes for others. He watched sleeves and hands near the bar. He said, "Hands!" A heart beat sooner than any danger could bite. He set a pace that was not slow, not soft, but true, so that men could keep it without paying with flesh. He worked inside the circle without breaking it. Second, he made a rule for his mouth that matched the rule for his feet. He would not give anyone a story the city could use to call him wolf. He would not steal, not because the farm deserved honesty, but because a stolen cup in another's cloth had almost turned him to iron and wood. He would not answer mockery in the lane. He would save words for names and for warnings and for the short, good sentences that make men stand up straighter. Drink now. Tie that higher. Put straw under your hip, or your sleep will steal your strength. Third, he chose a kind of defiance Rome could not read and punish. At night, when men turned in the dark and forgot themselves, he whispered names back to them when nightmares shook them. Gaius, you are here. Io, you are breathing. Kellen. The morning comes. He kept a tiny corner of his mind for counting birthdays, when someone remembered the time of the fig harvest in the village where he was born, for reciting a river's name, for the Thracian who feared he would forget it, for holding in his mouth the shape of the Gaul boy's true name, Medros, even though everyone on the farm called him Boy. None of this made iron fall away. None of it opened the farm's gate. None of it turned the Vilicus tender or made the overseer stop measuring days in skins of pressed juice. The collar still circled Tiro's neck, though the wool softened it. The mill still turned for those who stumbled. The stocks still took ankles when fear in a man's chest made his mouth too loud. But these small choices, the ones that could not be written on a tablet or counted in wax, made a room inside the body where Rome could not walk. Weeks turned, the harvest ended, the press was scrubbed, the skins went to the pigs, the vines settled into their winter bones, work changed shape, digging replaced pressing, carrying replaced cutting. The ergastulum stayed what it was. Once, at the end of a cold day when the wind came down the slope like a knife, the Vilica stood at the doorway and looked over the line of men sitting on their mats. He did not step in. He did not speak. He watched a long time. Then he turned to the keeper and said, "The one from the city, the collar, he keeps the press smooth." The keeper grunted. It meant yes. "Stocks?" the Vilicus asked. "When he is sick," the keeper said, which meant almost never, "he keeps himself." "Good," the Vilicus said in a tone that was not praise, only strategy. "Fewer sores, fewer lost hands, more skins." He turned away. Even when powerful men think only of numbers, the shape of their thinking can carve a small space where flesh lives a little longer. Winter passed with its hard ground and its narrow meals. Spring woke the vines, summer fattened them, the farm's year made its circle. In all that time, Rome did not send for Tyro. The master did not buy back faces. The guest moved on to another city to speak high words over someone else's back. Felix's letters came now and then, very small and thin, because stewards cannot send much without questions. They never promised rescue. They only repeated, "Watch for small doors, keep your body whole." I remember. Sometimes, at the edge of the road, a new cross rose. Not every week, not every month. Enough. The farm men looked and did not look. They kept the ladder in their heads, because ladders keep you from stepping backward into a hole you did not see. Years stretch different for free and unfree. For masters, a year is a harvest, a tax, an election, a trip to the baths. For men in chains, a year is a shoulder that stops aching only when snow comes. A scar that fades from red to grey. A new boy who arrives with eyes like a deer's and, a year later, learns to say hands before the danger shows its face. One evening, long after the first harvest, Tyro sat by the ergastulum door while the keeper checked locks. The sky held that Roman kind of gold that makes even rough wood look like a statue. The air smelled of earth and smoke. The new goal, no longer new, thicker in the wrist, sat beside him. He touched the half-scratched seventh line on the wall with a finger. "You left it open," he said. Tyro nodded. "Some things are better open," he answered. "A closed thing can be filled with anything someone stronger wants to put in. An open thing can be filled by you." The Gaul looked at him from the corner of his eye, the way men do when they are learning how to keep their faces flat. "You think you will not meet the wood?" he asked softly.
I think wood does what men tell it, Tiro said. I think men tell wood what to do when fear makes them hungry. I think I cannot command the world's wood, but I can decide what to carry to it and what not to. If they ever raise me, I will not hang the name they want on myself. I will not carry their story for them. The Gaul was quiet. The keeper rattled a chain like a small thunder. Far off a mule brayed. The sky cooled. "Who taught you that?" the Gaul asked.
Tyrrell thought of a strip of wool, a dab of fat, a woman at a fountain with a small bow, a steward who counted keys and still remembered a boy's name, a shout at a press, a man on a beam who said a river once and made it into a prayer. "Pain," Tyro said, "and people." They sat. The keeper finished his round. Night came, down clean. This story of 7 punishments has no miracle ending because Rome did not write many of those for slaves. The lash taught fear. The chain taught small steps. The mill taught a slow kind of burning. The mark taught the eye to judge before the mouth could speak a name. The yoke taught public shame. Sail taught that a person can be lifted by numbers and set down in a darker place. The cross taught what Rome loved to teach most, that power wants to be seen and wants to be believed. But there were things Rome could not teach out of a human being. It could not teach Tiro to stop seeing sleeves before wood took arms. It could not teach the keeper to forget which bottle of fat to bring at night. It could not teach the Villicus to ignore simple math when mercy made his numbers better. It could not teach a woman in the forum to hold her head high when a boy could not lower his. It could not teach Felix to stop writing thin letters that carried a plank over a deep place. It could not teach the men in the Ergastulum to stop saying each other's names in the dark when fear tried to make them into numbers. That is how worlds change. Not always by banners and trumpets, but by hands that push a lever and say stop at the right breath. By mouths that refuse to carry the story power wants them to repeat. By eyes that see the person under the yoke and bow once, small and brave. If you walk Rome's old roads now, you will not see the crosses. You will see vineyards, low walls, bits of tile in the dirt, and stones worn smooth by feet long gone. But if you listen to the world that runs on fear, any world, not just Rome, you can still hear the creak of old ladders being set in place. Lash, chain, mill, mark, yoke, removal, spectacle. The names change with time and law, but the shape stays. The work of the living is to know those steps when we feel them underfoot, and to choose, where we can, the small defiance that keeps a human room open inside. To make hands heard a heartbeat sooner, to tie a strip of wool under iron for someone else, to write a short letter that is not a promise but a plank, to remember a name in the dark. Tiro did not break Rome. No one person did. But he learned the press and kept his body whole. He shared water. He spoke low. He watched for small doors where large doors shut. He became, in a narrow world, a maker of little mercies that refused to die.
And in that refusal lies the oldest kind of freedom, the kind that does not wait for a paper to be signed, but lives now, in the chest, like a steady flame that fear can bend but cannot blow out.